Hi everyone. Welcome to another Voices of Tower Hamlets. This is Councillor Piramir. So, Voice of Tower Hamlets is I interview interesting individuals, campaigners, etc., about issues that affect Tower Hamlets or issues that residents of Tower Hamlets are really passionate about. So today I've got Angela, who's the chair of UTAG, that's a United, the licensed taxi drivers trade group. And the reason why I've got Angela is they took TfL and won. It took them to court and won over TfL's livable street scheme or low traffic neighborhood, which was I think a street space or street safe or something like that. So in Tower Hamlets, it's called Livable Streets. I know a lot of people have been passionate about it. I know I wrote about it recently, about the over 2,000 people put a petition in saying that they are people of protective characteristics. That's people with age or on the basis of people who are elderly or have disability or other characteristics that are protected by law. They've been discriminated against by Tower Hamlets Council, especially the way they've done the consultation, where they implemented the scheme. So on the day when the petition was being presented, the court result comes. The High Court does this judgment where basically TfL's scheme got knocked out in the court by UTAG. So that's why I got Angela on to basically find out more and see if there's any similarities between the issues that we have in Tower Hamlets and the issues that they brought to fore with Transport for London, especially around the Bishopsgate area, Liverpool Street, which is just around the corner from us, just across the road from Tower Hamlets actually. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Angela. So Angela, tell us about yourself. You're not exactly the typical picture of normally have in mind or in media. So tell us about yourself and why a licensed taxi driver? Why a black cab driver, Angela?
Hello, Puru. Thank you for the opportunity to come onto your show. My granddad was a London taxi driver from the 1920s, and I used to be in the London ambulance service, and my roommate was a guy, and he decided to do the knowledge. I didn't know what it was at the time because my granddad died before I could speak with him about it. He explained, and I said, I quite fancy doing that because it's freedom and you get out of it what you put into it. So we did the knowledge together, and it took me 3 years, and that was, I got my badge 32 years ago, so in 1987, and I've been doing it ever since. And now my 2 sons are cab drivers as well. So it does seem to be in the family blood. That's basically what into it.
That's amazing. You in 2018 you formed you're the chair of an organization called UTAG. Why did the black cab drivers feel that they had to form an organization in 2018 to what made you form this organization? Were you under threat, or etc.? What was happening in 2018 and onwards in terms of how, so like the services that you provide?
Yeah, but I'll give you just a bit of background on that. I'm actually director of United Trade Action Group. There's myself and my colleague Trevor Merrills, and as you know, Karen, she's a senior member of it. And I'm also the Deputy General Secretary for Cab Drivers Representation Group, the United Cabbies Group. And we decided that when Transport for London stopped. They refused to give Uber any back in 2016, and naturally Uber appealed, and Transport for London more or less adopted Stockholm syndrome and didn't do what they should. They did not fight the appeal. Now, if I just go say that this is nothing to do with what we feel about private hire drivers. Honestly, it's nothing to do with that. But Uber as an entity were riding roughshod over all the regulations. And you've got other big PH companies, Addison Lee for one. They adhere to the regulations. You know, they are a sort of competition with the small C to the black cab trade. But we've rubbed along nicely since, crikey, about 1962 when minicabs, as they were called in those days, first came to fruition. We've never had any huge problems with them. Uber.
Can you talk about the regulations? I know you're seen as a public transport by the regulator. What kind of regulations do you have to abide by in terms of? It's not just like dropping a mate off to a place. What do the regulators expect yourself as a black cab driver to do? Like what is it different for? What is it that you have to do which is different from, say, someone giving a lift to a neighbor and dropping them off to the market, for example? Just to explain, because a lot of our listeners don't understand the kind of regulations that you're under.
That distinguishes us in London from private hire is that we have the unique right to apply for hire. So we can cruise the streets with our yellow light on. We don't need to be booked. If you saw a cab, you just put your hand up, I'd stop, and we go to wherever you wanted to go. To get that right, and it's a very hard-earned right, that we have to undertake the knowledge, which is an arduous task. It's not just learning a few streets and then you're okay. It's a succession of, it can be up to between 12 and 15 oral examinations. And you're marked on each one. And if you do well, get on to the next stage a bit more quickly. If you do badly, you can be held back. And we in London, we are the only, us and buses, are only forms of public transport that are allowed to apply for hire. That is the unique difference between us and the private hire industry. And also, our vehicles are highly regulated, controlled. They must adhere to very stringent conditions of fitness laid down by TfL. We can, if we want to buy a new vehicle now, we only have a choice of two. That's the TXE, the big electric cab, which comes into around about 70,000, or the Nissan Dynamo, which comes in at about 50,000. We can no longer buy even Euro 6 diesel cabs. So private hire are allowed to buy a range of cars. If it's electric, if it's hybrid, they can have a Prius, a Nissan. So our conditions of fitness and the vehicles that we are prescribed to buy are very narrow. So that's just a couple of things that how we are tightly regulated, and it's very hard to obtain a green badge. Open to anyone whatsoever, no matter what race, colour, creed, it does not matter. Open to everyone. It's just getting to the final hurdle that And if you can do it, if you can stick to it, you get that badge. And it's hard to earn, but it's so easy to have it taken away from you if you're not what Transport for London call a fit and proper person, and if you don't behave like a fit and proper person.
There's a lot of onus on you in terms of disabled passengers as well. I know that your vehicles have to allow wheelchair, etc. And I remember watching a program on the Knowledge. They were asking, like, you have a wheelchair passenger, where if they want to get to this club, etc., where would you drop them off? And the correct answer is you need to know where the disabled entrance is, or etc. at that time, kind of ish, or how, so an area where a wheelchair user could basically easily access. So there's a lot of emphasis on of catering for disabled users. And is it correct to say a lot of your passengers are actually regular passengers are actually disabled users? Is that correct as well, Angela?
Yeah, we carry a lot of disabled passengers. You may be aware of the boroughs and the local council's taxi card scheme, that they sort of fund taxi rides for disabled people with protected characteristics. They will pay up to a certain amount of their fare, and they use black taxis to do it, because our entire fleet, whether they're Euro 6s or electric, must be fully wheelchair accessible, and they have to ramp. I mean, that an extra step to help people with mobility problems get in and get out of the cab. They have a visual aid. They have yellow seat markings and yellow grab handles, hearing loops. So it makes it that much easier for disabled people to travel, and all taxis must that standard. And sorry.
No, and moving on to like fit and proper. I know a lot of taxi drivers are very opinionated. Is it so? Like, there's an impression taxi drivers are very opinionated and very loud and have very strong politics, let's say. Is that true, or is that just a stereotype that people have because because of media or etc.? What's your experience of people who drive? Are they from all walks of life, basically?
They are from every walk of life, really, and many different countries are welcome to our trade. And it's like any section of society. Some are opinionated, some are quiet, some are very political, and some issue politics. They don't get involved. But I think that this stereotype that, oh, the taxi trade is a white, football loving, hang 'em and flog 'em, I won't go out of the river brigade. That has long gone, and may it never be. We are a very, very broad, and that's how it should be. And I'm proud to be part of that.
No, definitely. But I just want to like 70 grand, 50 grand is a lot of money. So you have to work a lot of hours to pay that off. So there's another misconception, is that a lot of black cab drivers have villas in Spain, kind of ish, like you're all kind of like very privileged, etc. Or like, but from my experience, so I've got a friend who's a black cab driver, and also where I come from, the Hackney carriages, you have to work really long hours to make ends meet. Is that Is that still now as well? Because 50 grand, 70 grand to pay off a car is quite a lot of money, and you've got to put in the hours. Is that true, or am I just, or is the stereotype of the villas and the holidays, working 3 hours a day or working 3 months a year? Is that is that true?
I'm sure taxi drivers, private hire, bus drivers, train drivers, they may have villas in Spain, but it's all done by hard work. We don't just go out there and people throw money at us. What you put into it, you can get out of it. And I wouldn't decry anyone for working hard and, for their benefit and the benefit of their family. And if they want to villa, and I haven't got one, by the way, then absolutely fine. But you get into it what you get out of what you put into it. And there again, it's a bit of a stereotype that cab drivers work 3 days a week, and they're either on the Algarve, the Costa Brava, or they're on the golf course. It takes hours and hours. Excuse me, turn that off. You have to work extremely hard these days especially under the current climate, because people are very aware of their finances, and when I first started in 1987, it was just around the Big Bang, and it was very, very busy. The investment bankers, but that's all changed after a couple of recessions. It's changed, and we have to put hard yards in and the hours, as I'm sure anyone else who
I think there's a misconception of what privilege is. I find that privilege isn't someone earning money. If you put in the hours, then you deserve it. And that's how life. Well, that's how I was brought up. You put in the hours, you work hard, and then you have the right to play hard, kind of ish. And when I was a child, I had to do the paper round, kind of ish, before I went to school, and that was my pocket. I had extra pocket money then, and that's a culture I grew up in. But I think people misconceive that with. I think what privilege is if mum and dad buy your house, if there's a trust fund, or you through mummy and daddy's connection, you go to a fancy school or get a job. But I don't think licensed taxi drivers have access to trust funds for mum and dad, do they? No, I don't think so.
None that I know, Turu, and many of them, but it's not. I know it may be seen as a privilege. Honestly, isn't. It's anyone at all who has a license and the will to complete a very, very arduous knowledge can do it. Anyone who's got a green badge has not been fast tracked. They didn't wake up one morning and there's a nice shiny cab on the drive. There you go, Angie, badge, off you go. We all do the same knowledge, and we have to earn that badge. It's not given to us. Certainly not a privilege. If you've been out on an icy, freezing cold day on a little Honda 90 and it's pouring with rain, puncture, that's not a privilege. It really is not.
No.
But it's all part of it. And as I say, we are a really, really broad church.
So you've come to the fore recently by taking on the giant, the whale of London establishment, which is the TfL, in this ruling. So do you want to give a background as to what made you guys sort of like roll up your sleeves and take on the giant that is Transport for London? Because I know I've had issues as a local councillor with TfL, and we had to do a bit of direct action or threaten a bit of direct action just to get a small bit of change from them. So how did you like, what made you want to take them on in the court? What's the background of this court case? Do you want to give the listeners a view
Yeah,
as to what happened?
yeah, sure. But as I just touched on a few minutes ago, the UTAG became into being because when we first started taking court action against Transport for London, we did it in the name of my other organisation, the United Cabbies Group. But because we are a cooperative and not a limited company, we needed a limited company for what our legal team called an entity. So if there are any costs or any complication, there needs to be a legal entity to make that happen. So we formed UTAG, which is a company limited by guarantee, on the advice of our legal team and accountants. And we knew that if we did not do something soon, because the way that TfL were not enforcing the regulations, and at the Greater Assembly, they did an investigation into them some years, investigation, and their opinion, and they came out, and this is on record, that as a regulator they were woefully inadequate, and they're not getting any better. That in my opinion, that was a high for them, but they've gone downhill ever since. But that's why we UTAG started, and we know, as I'm sure you do, legal action costs a lot of money. If you want to get the good QCs, the good barristers, you have to pay for that. And so myself and my fellow director Trevor got in touch with some senior stakeholders in the taxi industry, fleet owners, garage owners, people that supply meters, credit card, a lot. And we had a meeting with them and explained that, my colleague Trevor, listen guys, if we go down, you're coming with us. Not as a threat, it was we rely on each other. We are a symbiotic relationship. You supply what we need, we come to you for what we need. And I think in all my years in the cab trade, the first time that there's been unity between the drivers and the suppliers, and they saw it straight away, and they said, absolutely, let's see if we can do this. And so we got donations from cab drivers, the stakeholders put in, and we built up a nice amount of money to start taking this legal action against TfL. And we've had a few cases, we've been to court a few times, not always been successful, but we had to take TfL and street space on because our view was this was being pushed under the guise of COVID. It wasn't because of COVID. It was another agenda that they saw COVID as, that's a good reason to push this through. And we went to our QC about it because we were being the taxi trade, who I represent, so I can only really speak for them. We were being denied access to more and more roads, which doesn't really impact upon us as taxi drivers, but as importantly, it impacts upon our passengers and the disabled passengers. So it was costing them more to do the same journey, because the road we could go down this week is now blocked to us, but public transport buses were allowed to have access. So we met our legal team in the Temple, and we gave a few examples of where we were being prevented from going. And what they said is we need to pick the right fight to have, because if we lose and it becomes case stated, very, very difficult to take on another scheme. And eventually we looked at Bishopsgate, as TfL called it, the Gate Bus Corridor. And we decided, with guidance from our QC and barrister, this was the one to take on, because that takes on the special status of taxes, the Equalities Act. It ticked every box that we needed to fight for our trade and for passengers. And decided to go after that one. It was expensive. It took a hell of a lot of work, hundreds and hundreds of hours. And you've spoken with Karen. Karen did a huge amount of work, and she was like a terrier with the councils, trying to get us access. Some councils were great, going all part of the street space. Some councils were great. Hammersmith and Fulham were good. Even Southwark gave us a couple of bus gates we could go through, but most of them just stuck their heels in. But TfL was giving them money to implement this, and so we decided we had to take it on, and that's why we did. And thank goodness we very, very strong. Our legal team were top class, and we won 4 out of the 5 grounds. We went after, but we challenged.
Do you want to go through the grounds? So you basically, in your application for judicial review, so I'm just going to give a background to what judicial review is. So I'm going to do a bit of legal history. So this is what I was taught in law school, and this is one version of how it works. So we have something in this country called the common law system, which is different from Europe in the sense that European law is civil law, which is based on Roman law, whereas our common law system is based on sort of like Anglo-Saxon law of old, where the difference is that the people used to elect their king, and the government was bound by the laws of the land, kind of ish. And you saw that in Magna Carta in 1235. According to Ridley Scott, it was Robin Hood who got King John to sign the charter. So in the Magna Carta, there's clause 39, which talks about life and liberty, that the government can't take away someone's life or liberty without any legal reason. So and if there's a jurist called Blackstone who basically codified the common law, he talks about that. So what it is common law system is that our basic human rights are protected by law. So government can't do whatever they want to do. So if government goes against those basic principles of human rights or civil liberties, then anybody has the opportunity to go to the courts under and it's called a judicial review. So the courts could basically look at a government's decision, and when I mean by government, it could be central government, it could be local government, it could be even a public body. So for example, TfL is an example of a public body. The BBC is another example of a public body. You could look at those decisions, or a regulator, for example, look at the decisions and say, had they breached people's human rights or not, and then they could overturn it. So that's one version of how it is. There's different versions. There's an interesting book called The Politics of the Judiciary by J.G. Griffiths, an LSE professor gives a different view, but this is the sort of like the Whig view of history of our legal system, and so that's the principle behind it. So what happened was TfL, a government body, made a decision. UTAG, along with the members, said that it breached human rights, not just of themselves as a licensed taxi driver, but of their passengers, and they brought the case forward. So when you do a judicial review, you have to put an application and you've got to put what the issue is, and then you've got to give your reasons why the court should overturn the government's decision. And UTAG, you gave 5 arguments, is that correct? And do you want to briefly just go through those 5 arguments that you put forward?
Yeah, sure. I mean, originally we put 6 arguments, and the 6 was that Transport for London had, in our opinion, deliberately hidden the management order. It was very, very difficult to find. Usually the TOs are published in the, and carried on to this every day couldn't. And in the end, it topped up that they had put the TMO in a publication, Islington Tribune, that didn't even cover the Bishopsgate area, but this freebie was available in, I'm not making that, Tesco's and an Emirates food hall in Bishopsgate. So they said, well, look, we have published it. It was in a publication. So we resist that ground. We had a word with our QC, and he said, look, this is probably the least important ground that we're going after. So, and Transport for London, although we think they are, you know, they are not playing with a straight bat, let's drop that one because the other grounds are far more important. So that's why some people may see that we went after 6, ended up with 5. The first ground we challenged was the special status of the Hackney carriage. And just quickly, in essence, that we are allowed to fly for hire on the streets of London. We don't need to be pre-booked. We are 100% wheelchair accessible, and not just wheelchair, disabled accessible. We also have done the knowledge, which gives us the right to apply for hire and the right to use the streets that we spent so long learning. And there's also, so that's there's which I covered, compellability. We are compelled by law to go the shortest route between any 2 points. So if I picked you up in Wapping and you wanted to go to the station, I'd be legally bound to take you the shortest possible route. You know, taken into consideration if there's an accident or protest, but also generally equal, I have to take the shortest possible route. And that compellability. And the other thing is visibility. The yellow light, if people can't see our yellow light, people who want a cab can't see it, they can't hail it. And if we can't see them, we can't stop for them. So that comes into play with these road closures. Bishopsgate, if someone wanted a taxi in the middle of Bishopsgate, we're not allowed to drive the full length of it. We can't see those people. They can't see us. And all this came into play in the case called Eventech, which was when Addison Lee tried to get access to the bus. And I think they went along the lines that TfL were granting the black cab trade, and it went to the European Court. And TfL said there and then that, look, the Hackney carriages in London are part of the transport infrastructure. They need access to all the curbs to pick up people, to stop and pick them up, and to help in and out disabled folk. And they rectified again in the recent case when private hire, I think it was the International Workers Union?
Yeah, IGWU, I think. Yeah.
Took action against Mr. Khan for imposing congestion charge on private hire and not on the Hackney carriages. And they used again the same arguments of our special status, and we need to be access to all bus lanes because of the disability, compatibility, everything I just alluded to. So when it suits TfL, the Hackney carriages are part of public transport. When it doesn't suit them, oh no, they're not. In fact, the mayor, Boris Johnson, for all his faults, he put us in the mayor's transport strategy. Mr. Khan took it out again with no rhyme nor reason, and yet, since he took us out, he's told the High Court that we are in fact part of the public transport infrastructure. And so that was the special status. The next one, which I know is of interest to you, Brewer, is the Equalities Act, the Public Sector Equalities Duty. And when I spoke last night, you summed it up beautifully when you said the clue is in the name, not the public sector equality is public sector equality duty. And we could see that was not being adhered to. It really was not. To such an extent that in the hearing, Transport for London said that in Bishopsgate, people with limited mobility or who can't really walk far at all, they said that the access points will be between 85 and 100 metres, so people can walk from their office to their cab or from the cab to their office. And Mrs. Justice Lang said, well, what about the people that can't walk that distance? And TfL's response was, well, if they can't walk that, if disabled people can't walk that distance, they probably can't make it. Now that is absolutely iniquitous and illegal. It's under the Equalities Act, because as you know, disabled people should not be treated differently to able-bodied people because of their disability. It's totally illegal. And yet that was TfL's high-handed and cavalier attitude. Well, if they can't make it, tough. They can't go, can they? And the judge picked up on that straight away. And also, when they did their equalities impact assessment, as you've seen in the judgment, they did it on the traffic light scheme from green, no negative impact, very serious, actually make the 100 yards or could not probably make the journey they put that down green, no negative impact. And the judge said that that's completely unacceptable. That should be code red. But that was TfL's attitude to it. And that seems to have been their attitude to the whole equalities impact assessment, the whole public sector equalities duty, section 149. They seem to have looked at it and then said, oh, well, not to worry. I've got something here that I'd just like to read you from the this is from Mrs. Justice Lang's judgment. Arrangements for carrying the disabled was not even considered. In my view, the weaknesses in the equalities impact assessment were not addressed and remedied by a conscientious and genuine consideration of the equality by TfL. The report read as if the EQIA was merely a formality and the outcome was a foregone conclusion. I conclude that the Mayor and TfL did not have proper regard to the public sector equality duty in making the plan and guidance. So that's what the judge saw, and that's what we saw, that they were thinking, oh, well, yeah, we had to do a bit of a equalities impact, but you know what? The disabled folk, probably collateral damage, acceptable in the scheme. And it really isn't. You know, I speak to someone as a disabled sister, so I do have a dog in that fight, and I know how difficult it is for disabled people to get round, and that is one of the big reasons why it was their plan and guidance was found to be unlawful, and that is being echoed by many boroughs.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I think a lot of people think that just because someone's democratically elected, they could do whatever they want to do, but that's not how it works in the real world. There's something called the rule of law, where you can't just trample on people's rights. You know, that's why it's called human rights, because it's inalienable. That's what it is, and regardless of what, those rights trump any decision made by anybody, or etc. So that's the second ground. Do you want and then move on to number three? What was number three? Ground number three.
Number three was under. Got it here. It was under the Human Rights Act. It was, I think, Article 1, Part 1, which goes into the control of use. Control of the use of a possession. Now, in our case, possession was a taxi. And our legal team put forward that TfL were in breach of A1P1 of the Human Rights Act because they were controlling use of our possession, the taxi, during certain hours of the day. That was the nub of it. Unfortunately, we lost that one very, very narrowly, and the judge did say that could be appealed if we wanted to appeal it. But she said that we didn't quite supply enough evidence that the control was having a huge impact, either financially or otherwise. But because it was right in the middle of COVID and there's few people about, not much traffic, it was difficult to quantify financially. So we narrowly lost that one, which was unfortunate, but you know, we must respect the judge's decision.
And then you got ground four.
Ground four is legitimate expectation. So it goes back to sort of unwritten contract and inferred and implied contract between us and TfL when we finally pass knowledge that we will be allowed to apply for hire on all streets in London where public transport, we will be able to pass and repass those streets basically without let or hindrance. And unless there are very, very good reasons. So, for instance, if they had to put in an emergency traffic order for building works to keep people safe, fine.
Yeah.
But apart from that, our legitimate expectation is to use those roads, being part of. We were found to be part of public transport in policy and in law by Mrs. Justice Lang, and she also what we've been saying, that we and buses are the only two forms of public transport allowed to apply for hire. And so we should be precluded and stopped from entering the roads where the buses can go. It was summed up by very good friends of mine as where buses go, taxis go. And we just expanded on it and went down the legal route.
So just for clarification, the pass and repass rights are not just on TfL roads and red routes, but they apply to all London streets. So I know buses go on local authority run streets as well. Is that correct? So your pass and repass right is on all London streets and not just the streets controlled by TfL. Is that correct?
Yeah. For clarity, excuse me. Transport for London own and run, but they're responsible for the red routes, and the local boroughs are responsible for the non-red routes. However, we took the whole street space plan and guidance. We challenged that, which a lot of the boroughs have implemented. And so we've said, or our legal team has said, that our legitimate expectation should stand, whether it's a red route or whether it's somewhere in Enfield or Hackney or and the judge found us. This was her the penultimate and last paragraph of her on legitimate expectation. Finally, the detriment suffered by taxi drivers as a result of the schemes introduced under the plan of street space is a relevant consideration to take into account. Conclusion. Taking into account all evidence adduced and submissions made, I conclude that the Mayor and TfL have not shown there was an overriding public interest which justified the creation of taxi drivers' legitimate expectation. And for these reasons, ground four succeeds. So, as you know, you're from a legal background, TfL did not show evidence that banning us was in the overriding public interest. In fact, ironically, it was against their public interest, because they are saying that people need safe transport, especially in these COVID times, social distancing. Absolutely do. Absolutely. Not agree more. But at the height of the year, when you remember there were hot tub centres that people could go to for COVID testing before the huge national testing started. And we were contacted by a senior clinician in a South London health trust, and he saw that taxis were the safest form of transport for reduction of traffic. Because we got the partition between front and back be sealed, and he decided it was even safer than ambulances, and that's why they use taxis to transport possible COVID patients to and from hot hubs. Now, I don't want to panic everyone. These were taken out of normal use. After every patient, they went back for deep cleaning, and they just wait for the. So please don't anyone think, oh God, did I just get in a cab that was used to go to the hot hub? I guarantee you did not. It was strictly controlled and overseen by medical professionals.
No, we have that in the courts as well. So after every day, they do something called fog cleaning or something like that, whereas 2 hours is the entire courtroom's deep cleaned every day. So that's what we do in the courts as well, because it's just standard practice, especially if it's used by the public. And then the final one is irrational. The final ground, irrational. Do you want to explain their behavior was irrational? That was your
yes. Well, our team posited that to ban London taxis, but everything I've said before, we are safe transport. That's not just that was a medical professional, abled access, everything that I've explained. That is totally irrational to stop us using where other forms of public transport can go, especially when people are looking for social distancing. A huge, they don't want to be at any more risk than possible. But stopping us from accessing where people may want to go and leaving them to go on a bus if they had to, it just seemed perverse. But it was totally irrational to ban us.
I just want to tell, because I've studied law, like irrationality is a very high threshold. So I was like, oh my God, you guys got TFL on irrationality, because it's a very high threshold. So for TFL to basically cross that threshold is it's a very tough one to on judicial review to get, but you got them on that one. Amazing.
We did, and we got them. It wasn't just a narrow win. It was a huge win on irrationality, because when we had a debrief with our legal team, the QC and the barrister said, exactly what you said, Guru, that irrationality is a high bar to cross, probably one of the highest.
Yeah.
And only between one out of between 60 to 100 cases are ever found ruled irrational under the Wednesbury sense, as you know. And we stormed that one, and the her ladyship was very, very scathing. We that we won on that how irrational that decision was.
So like a lot of people, it's taken a lot of work for you to even put a black and white case forward, because a lot of people I'm going to take him to court kind of ish. It's not as simple as that. So do you want to give us like a timeline from when you decided to take him to court to when you got the judgment? How long did it take, and how much work did you have to put in to basically win that court case? Do you want to just give us a rough idea?
Sure. Well, as you know, a judicial review has to be mounted within 3 months of the scheme being announced. There's two traffic management orders. One comes out to explain what's happening, and then I think it's 7 or 14 days later, the second one is the ratification. It doesn't matter when the work starts. It's not from that point. It's when the second TMO is published, and this is what we're going to do. We had 3 months to challenge that scheme, streetscape and the street space plan guidance. But we had looking at systems well before we decided, and we have been doing a huge amount of background work on case law, on what we needed to prove, what was going to be easy, what was going to be more difficult, and what was going to be nigh on impossible. Take everything into consideration. And we were working, myself, Trevor, and Aaron, from the UTAG board point of view. We were working 7 days a week, especially Karen. If it was 8 days, that girl would have been working 8 days a week. She put in hundreds and hundreds of unpaid hours. And our legal team worked for it for months. And it's not just a case of going to the court and saying, right, here we are, this is our case. First of all, they had to do permission for a judicial review. And for that permission, we had to do submissions why we wanted a judicial review, on which grounds we wanted the judicial review, our grounds for appeal. We had to lodge that. And then, of course, once we lodged that, Transport for London came back with grounds of resistance, why they didn't want us to appeal. And then they put the contra arguments in. So once we've read their grounds of resistance, we have to go back with second. This is why we want this to succeed. This is why we think it's challengeable. And the first judge looked at it, he said, I think this is a planning issue. I need to send it to the planning court. So it went to the planning court, and Sir Ross Cranston gave us permission to appeal. So we didn't need to go to an oral hearing. He gave us permission to appeal on special status and legitimate expectation. He didn't give us the right to appeal on the Equalities Act, the PSED, the A1P1 of the human rights, and irrationality. But thought that we have to challenge this. So if needs be, we will have an oral hearing. So TfL and the Mayor's Office did everything they have these three struck out for good. But Mr. Justice decided that she would roll up our next these three struck out things reheard. You roll that up with the judicial review, and so that's the case was on for over 2 days. And when our legal team re-argued public sector equality duty, A1P1, and the irrationality, she said, yes, in my view, they are arguable, and you can use the judicial review. And thank goodness our legal team did go back and say, no, we must, these are our arguments why we must have this heard. Because apart from the A1P1, we won the ground. So it's a huge amount of work.
And if you don't mind, roughly ballpark figure, you don't have to give me exact, how much financial resources did you have to put onto this, like a rough ballpark figure? So just to give people an idea that you can't go to the High Court with 20 quid or 50 quid on the table. How rough ballpark figure?
All I can say, it's six figures.
Gotcha.
So it is expensive. It really is expensive.
Gotcha.
You know, and you get for what we went to. I mean, we were told by people, you just line in lawyers' pockets, you'll never win with TfL on the mayor. But what we said is not lining lawyers' pockets, you are paying for their expertise. If you want a chance to win, you're taking on a case of this size, then you need the big guns. TfL brought out the big guns. You know, they employed Ben Jackson, who is from same chambers as Lord Panic, who represented Gina Miller when she took the government to court for illegally proroguing Parliament. So they come from chambers. Where they get money from when they've had to go all this cap in hand to government to bail out TfL so they can have the money to put the heating on it in their offices, crikey only knows. But we can only assume they're so confident that they were going to win and we would have to pay the cost, that money was no object. And it just shows that you can take on these people. You know, if you're taking on local boroughs, like I know certain boroughs are, they have groups that are taking on their local boroughs, then it may not come to that amount. We were on the mayor and the regulator, and we knew they were going to throw everything, put all the shutters up and come at us with the big guns, and we needed an even stronger army to go for them.
Well, just to let listeners know that people are you can get legal aid for judicial review. So if you're on benefit and you feel that your rights have been discriminated against, so for example the public sector equality duty, then you do get legal aid. So someone else pays for the legal bills, but so there is legal aid for judicial review for people on benefit.
Legal aid is an avenue that people can explore, but it wasn't available to us because we had the funds. We got thousands of people backing us, thousands of donators.
So this issue has become big in all these London boroughs. I know Hackney are taking their local authority to court. They're raising money. I know there's been a recent judgment in Camden where they quashed their temporary traffic order. Other councils have rolled back. Wandsworth have reversed their scheme. Sutton have reversed the scheme. Some have sort of like stopped rolling them out. I think Redbridge have stopped rolling them out, and others have sort of like delayed it. Like I know, speaking to colleagues in Haringey, they've taken a very slow approach, step by step, to get it right, kind of ish. And I think they've started the consultation right now, just learning from lessons, etc., especially equality impact assessments about the use of cars and who uses those cars or those modes of transport, and getting that data in. So we're having a series of hearings in Tower Hamlets. There was a massive petition. I think in total 2,500 people signed that they believe that people of protective characteristics were discriminated against, and they wanted the council to investigate it and implement the safeguarding policy to put a halt to the program, to safeguard people with protective characteristics and investigate the complaint. That wasn't accepted by the powers that be. In Tower Hamlets, it's one-man rule, unfortunately, regardless how you see it. So the mayor called all the shots. So he didn't agree with that. So what we're having is a cross-party panel. I'm a Labour councillor with a independent Tory and a Lib Dem councillor. We're basically putting a panel together to go area by area to have a look at, just listen to residents, especially residents with protective characteristics, to see how they feel aggrieved in terms of the way the consultation's been run or the way the schemes have been implemented. And we're going to kick off with Wapping on the 25th of February. But Wapping resonates with you because Wapping is one of the schemes that you looked at in terms of bringing this legal challenge, and it was one of the first schemes to sort of like stop licensed taxi drivers using the Wapping busgate, because I know that area, there's a lot of elderly residents, a lot of people with protected characteristics that are reliant, that traditionally have been reliant on taxis using the local authority scheme. Was Wapping something that that you looked at yourselves in UTAG, the Wapping busgate?
Wapping was probably the catalyst to much bigger things. And in essence, I spoke to you off air about the another group of taxi drivers, very, very good friends of ours, and you know, they do all they can to protect the trade and help our disabled and other passengers. They demonstrated for nearly 14 months against road closures in Tottenham Court Road, London Bridge, and then it ended up in Parliament Square. So we could get the attention of not just the politicians, but the disabled lobbyists, because it is affecting them well. And we had some disabled people come, a guy called Mick Scarlett, who was very, very supportive. He can see that the damage that will be done, especially to disabled people that could not either make the journey or it would cost them more money.
And I think that's the discussion I've had with people. Like a lot of people, like no one's against a better air pollution. We need to reduce air pollution. No one is saying that streets shouldn't be safer, but not at the expense of other people's rights. So the way I explain it is like the way we run our society is a bit like the legal system. When you go to court, you got the Crown prosecution up there. So if you're down there as a defendant, you get a duty solicitor to bring your case to the level, and then you could argue everybody has a fair crack at the whip. And that's how our society, the Equalities Act and the anti-discrimination law is like that, in the sense that it makes sure that people who are disadvantaged due to the accident of birth or other unfortunate events in their lives, that they get an even playing field. And that's what it is. That's what this legislation is all about. That everybody gets an even playing field, and you get a fair crack at the whip. That's what it is. It's not giving people special treatment. It's just basically evening up the playing field. And whatever we do, it shouldn't be at the expense of the most disadvantaged in our society. So yes, let's reduce air pollution, but let's bring everyone together, and not at the expense of the most vulnerable people having an adverse impact on their lives. Now, Angela, if people are interested in finding out more or about your organization, about the court case, or how they can help, how do they get in touch with you, or where do they go to get more information, or how can they support UTAG?
Can I just finish firstly what I was going to talk about? So the guys that were sort of organising the demonstrations, when Wapping came into force, they contacted myself and Trev and said, look, what can be done about Wapping? Because this is a thin end of the wedge. We've got, as you know, 74% of the residents there in the consultation voted to let tax in. But it was just, really 74%, we'll ignore that. And as we know, consultations have to be done, but they don't have to be adhered to. So we're going to be the QC.
that's democracy in Tower Hamlets. It's a different interpretation democracy. Sometimes you can have all the residents on one side, but if one person says something else, that's what happens. That's what I've been told. That's what I've been told.
The North Korean democracy.
And if that person happens to live in Wapping, then his opinions matter the most.
Absolutely. So we went to see the QC, and because it was experimental traffic, we did 3 months to power it. We only had 6 weeks. We were coming up to Christmas, and so we only had about 2.5 to lodge everything, and that was not enough time to get all the paperwork in, and then we didn't really have the group that approached it didn't really have the funds to just take that bus gate on. So we had, and then we thought, right, we are going to identify a scheme that we must go after. It's going to happen, and it did. And just before I come on to your last point, if I can just, we know that this is being pushed through on other agendas, and none of us want our family or our kids to have polluted air, and my trade is striving to go, over 30% of our fleet is now electric, and about 40% is 35% is Euro 6, which are the cleanest exhaust pipe emissions out there. We do have some 5s and Euro 4s, but they are being decommissioned because of the age limit. So we are trying, and we want clean air, and we want cyclists protected. We don't want to see cyclists put in danger. But of course, when you close these roads, not just to cabs, but to other traffic, and they tend to ignore the network management duty, and the overflow goes to already very busy roads where maybe the less affluent people live, that's just moving the pollution on. And surely that in itself, when you put in that extra traffic, that endangers cyclists as well. So it's not making cyclists any safer in that part. It's just moving the problem, not addressing it. So about COVID, in my judgment, the flaws identified were symptomatic of an ill-considered response which sought to take advantage of the pandemic to push through on an emergency basis without consultation, radical changes, plans to transform parts of central London into one of the largest car zones in any capital city in the world. The scale and ambition of the proposals and the manner in which they were described strongly suggest that the Mayor and TfL intended that these schemes would become permanent once the temporary was expired. However, there is no evidence to suggest that the pandemic will be permanent. So, and that seems to be the attitude of the other boroughs. Oh, it's COVID. Oh, it's social distancing. Oh, it's pollution. Yes, we agree with you with pollution, but as you say, don't take a hammer to crack a nut. There is a balance to reach which the minimum amount of people will suffer the consequences. But I would say to the good people of Tower Hamlets, and we have members there, you can take these people on. Please do.
Definitely.
Absolutely. You're more power to you. And as you know, Sutton has removed their, after our judgment removed it, there was a case management hearing last week where the Hackney, Chiswick, Hounslow, Lambeth were there. Hackney, unfortunately, was refused permission on the horrendous Hackney Roads group. They refused permission, but permission was granted to a little lad who has to go to a special school, and the group that's backing him went on his legitimate expectation, because the legitimate expectation is not just for the cab trade. We have our legitimate expectations. Other people have theirs, which are being just trampled on. So I would say to your people, it is possible to take on the big boys and win. And I wish everyone the best of luck, because it affects all of us. You know, more so the working class and the less affluent, because things are being pushed in your direction, in my direction. And the analogy that I use, and the boroughs may not like it, but I make no apologies, that in the 1850s, in the Great Stink, when the sewers became so toxic in London, it's when Parliament decided to engage the Joseph Bazalgette to build the sewers. And where did they decide to send it? Not in London, down to the east, where the poor, because that's what you do with, and this is just history repeating itself. It's unforgivable. I wish you all the luck in the world with your fight. And if anyone is interested in what UTAG are doing, we got a very comprehensive website. All it is www.utag.london. You find everything on there. They can find the judgments, and the lawyers in the case management hearing last week were quoting from our judgment. It's having the ripple effect is now turning into a much bigger wave. And anyone who in Tower Hamlets who wishes to take on, I would urge them to have judgment, and you can do it. Use our judgment, which, although it's up for appeal, it's still live at the moment.
I just want to do a clarification. I know there's a time limit on judicial review, but you can have leave to basically apply late. So there was a recent judicial review against someone took Tower Hamlets Council, and it's going to be heard, I think, this month, and I might get a witness summons to it for the plaintiffs. But they got leave because they explained that there were circumstances that made that they had to apply things. So yes, there is normally a time limit, but you could get leave to apply, but you need to have really good reasons for that. But I just want to say thanks, Angela, for doing this interview. It's been quite inspirational, kind of. You've taken on the Moby Dick, the whale of London politics, TFL, and now it's up to the residents to take on the minnows, the local authorities, kind of ish. So no, I just want to say thank you for it, and it's been really inspirational. And we look with interest on the Court of Appeal judgment. But thank you again, Angela. And guys, if anybody wants to find out more about UTAG, it's www.utag.london, and you can have everything there. But thank you. Any final word, Angela, before just for our viewers?
Yeah, just that people ask what the next steps are going to be for. Yeah. We are waiting with bated breath for whether or not TFL are granted permission to seek leave to appeal. As you know, there has been refused once from Mrs. Justice Lang, and she said, in essence, I can see no reason why leave to appeal should be granted. And she further went on to say, I can see no realistic prospect of an appeal succeeding. But naturally, for a political, they're going to go for the appeal. They have put in their grounds for appeal. We have lodged our grounds of resistance. We've both asked for the hearing to be expedited, so we could just draw a line on it, under it rather, and see if we can just get some semblance of normality back to this madness. But as I say, I wish Tower Hamlets the best of luck, and we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We want to reduce pollution. We want to see cyclists safe. We really do. We're not enemies, but we must come to a considered and workable middle ground. Otherwise, it get worse. And thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. And I've spoken with Karen. We do have members in Tower Hamlets, and we will be asking them if they will be prepared to do a submission for you for your cross-party panel. And we'll be sure to get in touch with you off air about that.
No, thank you again.